Hello, my name is Alan Rudy Froese, and I am your other teacher in Foundations of Worship and Preaching. You got to know Rachel Miller Jacobs a little bit last week as she introduced the course and invited you to do your introductory videos. And um, I am going to continue this week with the whole idea of context. Thank you for your videos. You told us a lot about your context, and this week is really a kind of a continuation of some of those stories that you told um, that helps you and us figure out more about context. Context is kind of a weird thing because we live and breathe in a world that we're familiar with, in church, in home, and in all kinds of places. But then we get some good questions asked from somewhere else, and we start to analyze those very familiar things that we do in different ways. And that's kind of what this week is all about. Michael Hahn in his book, and then in Preparing Sunday Dinner, we're reading a few pages in here about that will help us give us some new categories and new questions to ask as we enter into what worship actually is and where we're coming from. I have my own experience in worship, and these questions help me figure some of those things out and give me some new categories to think about. Michael Hahn's book is very good. The whole book is very good. And he's working at intercultural worship or culturally open worship, which is something that many of us are working on in the Mennonite world and beyond, of course. Um, and But his introductory work, and then if you look at one of the case studies, um, just it does help us with looking at intercultural worship. But the first step is for us to notice our own culture. And the questions he asks and the methods he uses and the categories he uses are very helpful for us to think through our own culture of worship. So, for instance, on page 31 of of Hahn's book, how are people greeted at church? Stay with these questions. Of course, you can read very quickly and just pass over them. Stay there. I want you to meditate on some of these questions. Draw pictures. Be curious. Write poems. How are people greeted? How is silence used in worship? What is the worship space like, and what does that say about the congregation? How is Scripture introduced? How is Scripture read? How do bodies move? Right? So these are questions that he's asking of a number of churches to kind of figure out some comparison things. And we can do that too. But for now, use these questions as a way of understanding your own congregation, the one you're in right now. And obviously what's going to happen too is that you're going to be thinking about other congregations you've either attended or visited and so on, and that's great. But focus mostly on your own experience in the congregation you're in now. And look at some of these questions. That I just named a few of them. There are many others. And then look at, we're inviting you to read, I think it's just chapter 1 or part 1 of the book, pages 15 to 18, and then pages 20 to 42. And this will all be on Moodle, these page numbers. And then also look at one of the case studies and maybe just, I don't know, skim it. Look at one of the case studies that's in part 2 of the book and look at the categories he's using there as he actually does a study of different churches. That might help you to sort of give you your own categories to think about your own context. So that's Hahn's book. Take a look at those pages and chapters. And then Preparing Sunday Dinner is another sort of angle, another view at how to look at your context, the chapters, who's coming to dinner. And this, again, gives us some great categories and questions for looking at context. So, for instance, look at the shadowed and highlighted parts especially. There are questions and some comments there. Again, I know you can read this so quickly, but stay with these for a little while. Stay with some of these questions and some of these categories, like what are the social connections in your church? How does that work? Economic class. in your own congregation. We don't talk a lot about class, I've noticed, in churches. Maybe your church does. There you go. That's my context. We don't. What are the signs, symbols, rituals that are important in your congregation, and why? So those are just a few of the categories that they meant. I've just mentioned a few of them that they have. So take a look at those. And for your assignment this week, you have one post to write and then respond to 2 other posts. So that your post should be up Wednesday at midnight and your response is on Friday. And make this post as simple as possible. I'm really big into one thing. Choose one thing that you want to tell us about your congregation, your congregation's context. Maybe you just want to tell us about the economic class in your congregation. Maybe you just want to tell us about how bodies move in your congregation, right? Just one thing. Maybe you just want to tell us about music in your congregation. The point of these posts and many of our assignments, at least in the initial part of the class here, is not for you. Don't have to prove to us that you've been reading everything. Okay? No, we trust you on that. What we'd like you to do is focus on this week, just one thing that you find quite interesting that you've observed in your congregation, or maybe you've seen a new category for something you've never thought of before, and you'd like to tell us about that. And then we'll respond to your post as we on Friday. So if I were to tell a story about if I were to do a post, it would look something like this. I think I'd want to talk about economic class in a congregation, and this would be a congregation I was in some years ago. But this would be the kind of story I'd tell. As a pastor, I was expected the Thanksgiving offering, where people brought food up front for the local food bank, to be for others. That was supposed to be for other people. That was just the way it was for most of my life. And then one church that I was, where I was pastor, I noticed that, so the pattern, right, is that, people bring food forward for the local food program, and somebody's going to come in on Monday morning and take that food that was offered and bring it to the food hamper or the program that actually does this. But in one church I was in, I noticed that on Sunday, before the congregation, as soon as most of the people in the congregation had left, there were 1 or 2 people who were just kind of hanging around. And I was talking to them a bit, and it was pretty clear they had some other agenda. And they kind of I think they kind of wanted me to leave before they left. And what they did was they took some of the cornflakes boxes home and some of the tuna tins and so on. And I realized in that moment that our food hamper was not for people outside, not only for people outside, it was for people inside the church too. And that had a way of giving me a new insight into my own context, my prayers, my sermons, my calls to worship, everything after that. And then committee meetings, what I brought to committee meetings was different after that experience, because I learned something new about my context. So that's the kind of story I might share this week, and I'm glad I was able to share that one thing with you. So all the best this week, and take a look at Han, and take a look at preparing Sunday dinner, and I look forward to the one thing that you're going to say you're going to post on Wednesday night. Bye-bye.